Welcome to Dad Talk Today. My name is Eric Carroll, and we have an amazing show lined up for you. We are fighting for fathers all across the United States and all across the world where you can be glad to be dad. Stick around, guys. Dad Talk Today is about to begin. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Dad Talk Today. I'm Eric Carroll, and I am joined with Mr. Kevin Hickey. Kevin, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
Doing all right, guys. We got another week coming. It's another live Q&A, guys. If you got some questions for Kevin, put them down in the comments, and I'll bring them to him. Really quick, nothing about this broadcast creates a client-attorney relationship. Don't use it in court. We're just giving you advice. Even though you're talking to a professional, don't take it as professional advice. Anyway, other than that, what you been up to, Kevin?
Man, past week, I had a nice week off. Went with a couple of buddies. Went out west. Went to Wyoming, Montana, Yellowstone, Glacier National Park. I tell you, it's beautiful. I almost didn't come back.
That's some of the most beautiful parts of the country that I didn't know until I made it out that way, that you don't get much. I mean, not many people talk about it.
You don't, if you don't live out there, you don't hear a lot about it or go, other than the national parks. But those states, and Idaho too, are just you can't describe it till you go. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. So, guys, again, if you got any questions for Kevin, put them down in the comments and I will bring them to him. Kevin, I guess while we're waiting for some of the questions to roll in, let's talk about a topic I don't think we've discussed as much on the show, but it's definitely something very big inside of family law, the topic of alimony.
Yeah. So, alimony. And again, this is going to vary really drastically state by state. So you'll want to talk with your attorney or a professional in that state where you live about the alimony laws and whether you have a good alimony case or not. Alimony is designed overall to try to equalize the imbalance between two spouses that are divorcing in their income. It's to try to equalize that imbalance in income. It is rare that each spouse is making right at the same amount of money. Usually one is making a lot more than the other. And that can create a situation where the spouse that is not making as much money may need some kind of support when there's a divorce going on. So they will request alimony, and that's what alimony is designed for, is to help that spouse. You hear the phrase, keep the same standard of living. That's, that would, if you did that, the spouse that's having to pay would be basically paying their entire income in alimony. They're paying for themselves, half for themselves, and then half for the spouse they're paying to. And so you don't really get it to where it's exactly equal, and that other spouse and the receiving spouse gets to stay in the exact same standard of living. But it is designed to try to help them get on their feet. The factors that go into deciding how much alimony and for how long, there's numerous factors involved. One of the biggest is the length of the marriage. A shorter marriage the judge may not feel alimony is required at all or needed. But if there's a really, really long marriage and there's a huge imbalance in income, then a lot of times we see a judge award alimony.
Yeah. So who would go into court? Who would be somebody that would be looking at having to pay alimony? I know, isn't there like a certain time period that you got to be married? And I know all states are different, but isn't it like 10 years?
Some states, I think, have a minimum amount of years that you have to be married. Arkansas does not. Some states, I think Texas is one of them, has a cap on alimony, how much you can award. But a lot of times, marrying people will enter into an agreement ahead of time. So you've probably heard of a prenuptial agreement. Yep. And then sometimes in a state like Texas, they'll put together, well, we're not going to look at that law. If we do divorce in the future, you're going to have to pay more than that or less than that. So every state has different rules on it. Arkansas, you don't have to be married a minimum amount of time. You just have to look at the state you're in.
Right. And you talk about prenuptial agreements. I've been talking to some people that had a prenup here. They said did them no good. For somebody that's not as aware of what a prenuptial agreement is supposed to serve, what are some of the purposes behind that?
Well, usually the easiest way to describe a prenup is if we ever divorce in the future, you're going to keep what you brought into the marriage and I'm going to keep what I brought into the marriage. So if I bring in $100 and you bring in $5 million, and then we get divorced 5 years later, you're getting that $5 million back and I'm getting my 100 back. Now,
right.
where the gray area comes in and the questions usually come in is what happens after we're married and what we acquired during the marriage. Usually the prenup will say, if I keep it in my name, then I get to keep it. But if we put both our names on it, then it's presumed that that's supposed to be half and half. So that's where a lot of the questions come in on a prenup. Not so much what you had before, but what you acquired during the marriage, and is there any marital interest in that?
Right. We got a question coming in here from Jared Enix. He said, I filed a SAPCR on the 11th. I filed an emergency injunction today. How long until judge has to do something? I'm in Texas.
I'm not sure what the SAPCR is. Emergency injunction. I'm guessing this is a custody case. I'm betting there's not any time parameters on when the judge has to act. I'd have to look at the Texas statute to really see that. But usually emergency cases, those are usually put in front of the judge pretty quickly when there's an emergency motion filed, to give him or her a chance to look at it and see if they need a hearing pretty quickly. And if they feel like they do, it's usually days or within 2 or 3 weeks. It just depends on the severity of the emergency.
Yeah, he followed up. He said, how long before I get a response from the judge on an emergency junction?
That's the same thing is, you file that, you got to make sure the judge has it. Just because you file it with the clerk sometimes doesn't mean it goes straight to the judge. Different courts are different in every state and even by county. But just make sure the judge has it. A lot of times you can put a cover letter with it saying, Judge, here's an emergency motion that I just filed and I need a hearing as soon as you can. And that kind of alerts the judge as to what's going on.
Right. He followed up, and what motion should I file next in my quest to get custody of my kids?
Well, many times when we're hired on a case, a custody case, and there's an emergency situation, but we're also wanting to permanently change custody, we'll file both. We'll file a motion for emergency change of custody and then a motion for a permanent change of custody. So if you're wanting to permanently change custody, not just deal with this emergency situation, then that'd be a separate motion. And there's different verbiage. I was just talking to an attorney in North Dakota today. They use primary residential responsibility is the phrase they use for custody. Other states have custody and then parenting time. They use both of those words to mean different things. So whatever state you're in, you'll just have to make sure you've got the proper verbiage in there, and you'll want to file a separate motion to have a permanent change of custody.
All right. Dave Murray said, what are your thoughts on judges who rule to keep custody evaluators in the hearing after being contested by the father on record for bias, that the custody evaluator also runs public media, pro-mom club websites, and had personal Facebook friendships on their personal Facebook page of relatives of the other party, asking for a friend?
Well, we don't have custody evaluators in Arkansas, so I don't come across them a lot. Some states use them routinely in their custody cases. So understand any answer I give I'm going to be not so versed in how they're used. But I think we've had a case similar to this again, and I would think that a custody evaluator would be in the same boat with an attorney, that if you've got all these connections with family for the other side and you think there's a lot of bias there because of that, they are part of a mom's group or a dad's group, one way or the other, and could be biased against the gender of one parent, That's something that you've got to have checked into. I mean, if there's enough connections there and enough bias, you may need to file a motion with the court to get someone else assigned.
Yep. Summer O'Brien said, do you believe a child just placed in special education and an IEP is a substantial change in circumstances? This is coming out of New York State.
I would need to know more. That's a good start toward substantial change in circumstances. If that is something that has developed since the last time you were in court, that to me shows that the child's needing some help of one type or another. And if the child is struggling enough and you can connect that to being at the other parent's house, then yes, that could be enough. Now, that last part is the key. Just because a child is struggling doesn't mean that it's the other parent's fault. The child could come over to, one parent could ask for a change of custody because of what you just described here. You get custody changed, and a year from now, the child's doing exactly the same. That might indicate that neither parent is really at fault. This child's just struggling. They're having some mental difficulties, and when you talk about an IEP, there's some learning issues there. That's usually what we have those for. So you're going to have to connect it to that other household, and that there's something going on there that's causing this problem for it to be a substantial change.
So speaking of those change of circumstances, that's what we get asked a lot. What are some change of circumstances that would actually hold up in court?
Well, one of these two would be something to look at that were just mentioned. I always look at school performance. When I have a client come in and they say, I think I want to get a change of custody, I usually ask how the child's doing. And one of the first questions is, how's the child doing in school? Are their grades, have they plummeted? Are they staying the same? What's their behavior like in school? Is their behavior normal? They're doing fine. They're not getting in trouble, or has their behavior gotten worse? They're acting out at school. They're getting in trouble, having to go to the principal's office or whatever. Those are two things that you really look at first. The custodial parents' work stability. Are they losing jobs over and over? Their moving stability. Are they moving homes constantly, which causes the child to have to change school districts? All of those things. And then there are major things that happen. Is there abuse that's starting to happen in the home? Is there drug and alcohol abuse by the parent or a significant other of the custodial parent that's living in the house? All of those things are something you want to look at if you're trying to show that there's a substantial change in circumstances.
Yep. This is a little bit of a long one. I'm going to read it from my cell phone. It comes from Anthony Conte. He said, so DCS in my state feels that child abuse and parental alienation with coaching is not worth investigation, especially after 2 years of not even proving their case. The child has now been showing borrowed stories, knows the case entirely, has even been made to sit down with mom to write a parenting plan she agreed to with them. The guardian ad litem knows everything, yet does nothing. 8 years of our child's 9-year life. What can be done to enforce Department of Children's Services to check out the situation? Aware of writ of mandamus to enforce the agency? I hope that's not the only avenue.
And writ of mandamus, again, I guess you could do that against an agency. I've usually done it. Not usually. A writ of mandamus is very rare. That's when you try to go straight to the appellate court in your state and get that court to force the lower court, the trial court, to do something. It's very rare to get one of those, and the Court of Appeals doesn't like to jump into that. But yeah, that's one possibility. But I just I don't know what else to do in situations like that other than appeal. You've got to, and I don't understand when I hear a question like this, why the guardian ad litem or whoever else didn't take action on what was shown. If it was really shown there was alienation going on and the other issues that were in the question, I don't understand why an ad litem wouldn't take action on that or put some kind of recommendation. An ad litem's job at the end of the case is to give a recommendation to the court. And it's not just on custody and visitation. They also give recommendations like, don't let little Billy, watch more than 2 hours of TV or play more than 2 hours of video games at a time, or There's all kinds of recommendations that are regarding the welfare of the child. So if all of this was shown, it seems to me that would really raise flags for an ad litem to do something. I'm wondering if the evidence just wasn't quite strong enough, or what happened at the hearing. Something didn't happen to get their attention enough to do something about it. So I don't know what else to do except keep gathering your evidence and try to go back again. It's about all you can do.
Yeah. I got a little bit of another long one, Kevin. I'm going to read this over here.
I have to keep grabbing my glasses to read these.
Yeah, it comes from Jason M. Burmender. He said, I have a 5 and 3-year-old son. 3 years ago, my ex tried to get my oldest in therapy, saying he was traumatized by the divorce. He was fine then and is fine now. Over the past 3 years, she has tried to get him into therapy 7 times through the doctor, CPS, and the parent coordinator. The parent coordinator rejected her request twice, but gave it to her the third time and gave her decision-making on who the therapist is. My sons have been in therapy since January, but the only diagnosis is for anxiety, and the therapist told me this was more so insurance will cover it. I feel my son is being mislabeled, and his regular boy behavior is being blown out of proportion. My ex has 7 different diagnoses of 5 different mental illnesses. From what I hear, the guardian ad litems like therapy, but don't take into account situation where my ex is raising my sons to have issues that don't really exist, which will actually cause problems. How can I get them out of this situation? I'm in Wisconsin.
I'm wondering if you if your case is still pending. If your case is still pending, you've still got time to prepare for court for your final trial and get some evidence together. I think you're going to need an expert to come in, and exactly what type, I'm not sure. You may need a couple of experts. It almost sounds like mom has a little bit of Munchausen's by proxy going on. That doesn't just apply to physical ailments, saying my child is sick, physically sick here and there. The Munchausen's by proxy parent can put mental diagnosis on their kids too. And if the boys are fine and she is continuing to push that issue, there may be a little bit of that going on. Those are all of those things you listed are alienation tactics too. So you may want to have an alienation expert look at this, especially since I think you said it was the parenting coordinator twice rejected mom's request for counseling. She finally relented on the third time. That to me is an indication that no one was really buying what mom was saying, and that the children were actually doing okay. It's kind of a shame that after the third time, now this therapy has started. I hope the kids are still doing okay, because it sounds like they were before the counseling started. But if you're preparing for trial, you may need to get an expert or two to help you at trial. And if not, if you don't have a case pending, you may want to think about having to file something to get it reopened, because I don't know how long you want to let this go down the road of the kids getting counseling if they don't need it. Something you need to look at.
Yeah. So you brought up something, I think parental alienation is talked about very thoroughly inside the community, but one thing that's not as much, and I would like to learn a little bit more about myself. You mentioned Munchausen by proxy. For somebody that's not familiar with that, what is Munchausen by proxy?
Well, the original, and I don't know exactly how the history came down, but the first, I don't know if it's a syndrome or not, but the first phrase you always heard was Munchausen's syndrome or Munchausen's diagnosis. And that is essentially like a hypochondriac. They're constantly saying, this is wrong with me, I'm sick, I feel bad. They're going to the doctor over and over and over, and there's really nothing wrong. It's the typical hypochondriac. Munchausen's by proxy is when you say, no, it's not me that's sick, it's my child that's sick. And so you start to inflict these ailments on your child that are not there. And doctors will report this. They'll say, look, this mom has come in here 8 times in the last 2 months with all these things that is wrong with her child, and we're not finding anything. And they will start to put in the notes, we think this may be a Munchausen by proxy situation. It's more of a kind of a mental disorder with the person. They think there's constantly something wrong, almost like a paranoia kind of thing. But it's very damaging to the child. And if the child can't process that to understand that they're actually feeling okay, it can be very emotionally and mentally damaging to them if they're being told they're sick all the time.
How often do you see that in cases?
It's very rare.
Is it? Okay.
And what we ends up happening a lot of times when I'm hired on those cases, I'm hired by the parent that is having the finger pointed at them as being Munchausen's by proxy. And they tell me that's not true, and the child really had ailments. Well, if I can get you can get medical records and see what happened when you went to the doctor all these times. What did the doctor say? And if those medical records back up that this child was really having problems, then there's your defense. But if not, that's a problem.
Yep. Got another question right here from Jared Enix. He said, is CPS getting involved a substantial change?
Many times it is. What you have is, now you talk about a substantial change. Let's say you come to me and talk to me about this tomorrow, and I say, I think we've got enough to file. What I have to think about is, on an emergency, what happened that got CPS involved, and how big of a problem is it? Is it something where we really got to get this child out of this environment as soon as we can? And if it is, then that's an emergency situation. Now, if it's a one-off, kind of a one-time thing with this other parent, that whatever it was happened, if we're looking for a permanent change of custody, and that is our only change in circumstances, and we don't go to court for 6 or 7 months, and the other parent has been a model parent all of those months until we go to court, the effectiveness of that initial thing, that this initial emergency situation, might not be enough to carry the day at a final hearing, if that makes sense, because so much time's gone by. But if it's serious enough, and if the other parent continues to struggle and have problems along those lines, or even other things start to happen, then that may be enough of a substantial change at the final hearing, even months later.
Yeah. Ryan Hunt said, Kevin, what's your opinion on family violence and assault? Just a week ago, my wife's ex-husband assaulted me in front of my daughter, which led my ex-wife assaulting my current wife. All caught on surveillance camera on my property during exchange of picking up my daughter. If your client had committed this assault, would you drop them as clients?
I would have to hear all about it. I guarantee you there's always two sides to every story. This isn't so unfortunate that this happened, especially in front of at least one child, and maybe if there's other children involved too. These visitation exchanges with the family members that you're talking about, that's going to have to take place somewhere else, public or at a police station or something. These kinds of things cannot happen. And, they get out of hand in a hurry. People get hurt. People get killed. I mean, it's not, in this day and age, it's just not something that's supposed to happen. If I felt like, my clients went and instigated something, we'd have to have a serious talk. I'd have to really understand why that happened and what happened. And, before we'd go any further.
Yep. Amber Leanne Flores said they like the attention they get from the illness, so much so that they can eventually actually do things to make people sick. Example, like on The Sixth Sense, that movie, the mom was making the daughter sick. That was Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I'm curious, do you think, I've seen some parents that like to live through their kids and are constantly posting stuff about their kids. Do you think that kind of plays into Munchausen's?
I think it does. And there's a lot of, we've heard the word projection. There's a lot of projection, and this way they can use the child. And one of the things that is so kind of sinister about it is a lot of these parents have the thought process of, man, if I was sick, that'd really be bad. But what if my child was sick? I can really get attention then. And it's definitely a sickness.
It really is, man. In talking about projection, that seems to be one of the tools that the narcissists use. They project all these different things on you. They go on smear campaigns, and social media is definitely a place to do it. What are some examples of projection, Kevin?
Well, just kind of like what you're talking about. or if you're having issues yourself, that's what projection is really your own shortcomings as a parent. Some of the things you're doing to the child, you want to point your finger at the other parent and say, no, it's not me, it's the other parent that's doing that. And a lot of parents that project like that also talk to their children constantly and blame the other parent and say bad things about the other parent and try to turn them against them. And of course that is alienation as well.
Yeah. How hard is it to bring that out in court? I would think it would be pretty easy.
It can be. It depends. A lot of times, unfortunately, you have to have the child testify, and if they're really young, then that's a no-go right from the beginning. But you've got to have some kind of proof, either witnesses that were around that overheard the other parent talking to the child, or you're going to have the child come in and testify, or the child may have disclosed to the ad litem, look, here's what mom was telling me about dad. And the ad litem can then use that information.
Right. Yeah. I think we see that one definitely a lot. And there's many other things that go into that. Let's get back on that subject of alimony though. I mean, for somebody that has to pay that, usually what is the length that somebody usually has to pay that alimony?
Well, let me kind of use an example. If someone comes to me and they have been married for 20 years and they're getting divorced, and one of the spouses is going to ask for, if I'm representing the spouse that's going to receive alimony, I will usually use 20 years as a starting point because that's the length of the marriage. It's kind of a logical number to start with the judge. And again, this is under Arkansas law where there are a lot of factors involved in alimony. And so the judges, you've got to kind of show all of these things. So you want to show length of marriage. You want to show just how much this disparity in income is. And you want to show need. You want to show, yeah, judge, here's how long they've been married and here's how much more the husband makes. But my client needs, here's her monthly expenses now that she's going to have to be on her own. Here's her rent. Here's her utilities. Here's her car payment. Here's her health insurance. Here's her car insurance. Cell phone, all of that stuff. You want to show all of that and say, this is what it's going to take for her now that her husband's divorcing her. This is what's going to take her to live monthly. And so you want to bring all that to court and show it. And I would be asking in that 20-year marriage example, I'd be asking for 20 years. Now, the judge may give that. The judge may say, I think 5 years is enough. I had a judge one time, I was representing the wife. This was years ago. She was going to college. They'd been married almost 30 years and divorcing. So she was a non-traditional student going back to college. She had 3 years left, and the judge set alimony at a certain amount higher for 3 years while she was going to college, and he had to pay for her college. And the judge said, I'm doing this because then she'll have a degree and she'll have something to use to go out and get a paying job, and then we can come back and reevaluate the alimony. So there's all kinds of things that a judge can do when they're looking at alimony.
Yep. Got a long one here. Mr. Mark Allen said, the past year, Utah had 50-50 rebuttable presumption of custody come up legislatively, and it was added as an option for a judge to decide, but the goal was to have it to be the de facto norm. A well-established senator attorney was able to convince other legislators that it should not be the de facto, and his legal firm makes a lot of money from acrimonious divorces. This coming legislative session would appreciate you keeping Utah on the radar as we push for 50-50 de facto rebuttable presumption. Yeah, man. So I think every one of these states right now have a lot of this 50-50 legislation coming up. I know, Kevin, Arkansas passed earlier this year. Has that went into effect yet?
It goes into effect. I'm going to have to double check. I think it's next month. I think it's in July. If it's not, it's in August. So it's coming pretty fast.
Yeah, guys. So you just got to get in there and push it. I think one thing that, we've been to a lot of different states advocating, and one thing I get, you haven't been to our state. You haven't been to our state. Dude, there's 50 states going on right now. So to keep up with what's going on in each one of those places, it's a lot of hard work, but I can guarantee you the more you get your grassroots movements in there and you guys stay on top of it, scenarios like you're presenting. That's not an uncommon thing. So I'm curious though, man, while we got a little bit of time to buy, and guys, if you got any questions, throw them down there in the comments. Let's take it back to John Mast. Have you heard anything out of that case, Kevin?
No, nothing new. The police are, and the prosecutors are pretty tight-lipped about it. Again, the trial on that case is probably going to be next year. I do know, and this is public record, I do know there's a scheduling conference this Wednesday. And scheduling conferences are something that judges usually use. They say, okay, I want to get both sides in here, and we need to talk about when are we going to have a deadline for disclosing witnesses? When are we going to have a deadline for any motions that need to be filed? When do we want the jury trial to be? How many days are you going to need for trial? It's kind of an informal almost discussion between the judge and the attorneys to get an idea of how long is going to be needed for the trial. And many times they will set the trial date at that time. So I'm not sure on Idaho how they handle that, but we might know Wednesday when that trial is going to be set for. Now, that won't mean that it could be continued again, but we might have a little bit of an idea about that by Wednesday.
At the time John first reached out to you and you got involved in the case, could you tell us a little bit about what was going on in his situation?
Well, when he reached out to me, he was about 2 months from the end of his case. They had 2 days of trial in the fall of 2019, and then the final 2 days were going to be in the May of 2020. And so those last 2 months leading up to those final 2 days is when I got involved. And we've talked about it a lot. The alienation in that case was just absolutely ridiculous and awful. And I was brought in and worked with Tom Jackson out of Bismarck, North Dakota, and we got it ready for trial and had 2 days. And Tom and I both agreed those 2 days could not have gone any better for us. I just obviously disappointed in the verdict. We got a lot of things we did need and that were good for John. He didn't have to have supervised visitation and things like that. But and he was exonerated under that order. That was a huge issue that we obviously needed resolved. But yeah, it was a tough 2 days.
It was going back when I was making that tribute video a couple of weeks ago and reading those journals that he had to the kids and reading the pain in some of those words. Man, what kind of emotional toll do you think he was going through during that case?
A lot. And it was painful for me personally because you feel helpless. And the final 2 days of the trial were in May, and the judge did not make a decision until December. So months and months and months went by, and these parents everyone was just left in limbo as to what was going to happen. And for John, especially during that time, it was, there was frustration, there was anger, there was hurt over not being able to see his kids. There was just a full range of emotion. I mean, you can see how anyone in that situation going through that will lose all faith in the system, all faith in attorneys. He was just a dejected person. And
right.
He was very faithful. He was a Christ follower and very devout in his faith. And I think that's what got him through. I really do. And
yeah, he fought so hard. I mean, I don't think we talk about from you guys' perspective as much. What is it like when you got a client like that that's doing everything he can to be in his children's life? He's going through the justice route, the way the justice system, the way he was told to, and just see him keep coming up short.
It's hard, and it weighs on me. And I know most attorneys that do this kind of work. I've got some friends that do as much of this kind of work as I do, and we're people too, and we develop these relationships with these clients that are very close, and you're in the trenches with them, and it's hurt, and I felt as powerless as he did during all those months waiting on that decision. And he would ask these questions. Why is he not making a decision? I don't have good answers for him. I mean, I don't know why a judge would wait that long. Is he too busy? He just doesn't want to do it. And it's hard. You want to have answers for your client, and your client thinks, well, this is the law. The law is supposed to be kind of black and white. You're a lawyer. You should have an answer for me. And it's hard because a lot of times we don't.
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody earlier today. They had to wait 50 days after the end of their trial to get a verdict.
Right.
You know? They don't always get it right. I mean, do you see any justification on why it takes so long for somebody to get a verdict?
No, just being busy or procrastination or a little bit of both. I think it's for a judge that's needing some time, a couple of weeks or something, or a few weeks to really make a complex decision, and they want to make sure they really get it right. I totally understand that needs to happen. But when months and months go by, especially when you have the issues that were involved in John Mast's case, or really any divorce custody situation, I am in favor of some kind of legislation that puts some time limits on judges to get those orders out, because that is, I don't want to use the word irresponsible, but all it does is heighten the angst between those parents and create a lot of tension. And I can't help but think that delay in John Mast's case was a factor in what happened to him. You know, I think everyone was on edge, and when you finally get that order, and there's that release of, you know, the edginess, the energy you had all those months, and some of it's negative because you don't like the outcome. You know, it's just kind of like a ticking time bomb.
Yep. Winford on YouTube said, I am going through something similar to John Mast. Very interested in his case. July 10th will be 1 year without seeing my kids. Continued false allegations set me back in court. 100+ letters to my kids. How often do you see false allegations actually facing some type of consequence for making that allegation?
I wish I could say a lot, but it's not a lot. I wish it was more. It needs to be more. And we've talked about this before, Eric, putting in criminal statutes and different stop gaps to make these parents stop this kind of behavior. I know it's made it more cognizant for me in my cases, my domestic relations cases, to start looking at we've got a parent that's really alienating, and we're going to put an order together, to ask at the final hearing or in the agreement, mediated agreement we're getting or whatever, to put some language in there. If you're going to, every time you refuse a visitation for no valid reason, you're going to get fined. Or every time you talk in a derogatory manner in front of the child about the other parent, you're going to lose a day. Or, you know, we've got to start putting some consequences in there that have some teeth in it to make these parents stop acting this way.
Yeah, he's talking about 100+ letters to his kids. Guys, if any of you are facing alienation and you're not getting to see your kids, I would definitely suggest getting those letters out, because I tell you, those letters have a lot of meaning right now, going back and reading them after this has happened.
Well, I agree. And I truly believe, you know, obviously all the letters that John wrote, his family has those now, as they should. And I don't know. I just have a belief that someday his kids are gonna get to see all that, and know just what their dad thought about him and how much he loved them.
Definitely, man. What do you think one of the hardest aspects to overcome alienation inside the family courts are?
Getting the judges to see just how serious it is. I think they hear these stories a lot, and I don't know if they get jaded by it, and so it takes more to kind of move the needle with them as to how serious it is. But that's the biggest. When someone comes to me and starts giving me all these behaviors that the other parent is engaging in, and what are we going to do? That's the first thing I start thinking about, is how are we going to get it across to this judge how bad this is? Because most judges are just going to say, you know, you shouldn't be doing that, bad parent, stop doing it. I don't want you to do that anymore. Well, that's most of the time not enough. We need real punishments and real teeth in these orders. We need custody change sometimes. Um, and so that's the biggest thing I think of is how am I going to really make an impression on this judge of how serious this is? And judge, something needs to happen. This parent, we've written letters, we've told their attorney to tell them to stop. They're not doing it. They're not getting it through their head. And sometimes I've said that in my closings in custody cases and contempt cases. Say, Judge, nothing is getting this person's attention, and this is damaging these kids. We need your help. We need you to do something.
Right. Do you feel like sometimes the judges think when parental alienation is brought up that that's just kind of a cop out?
Maybe sometimes. One
Yeah.
of the biggest things a trial judge is supposed to do is judge credibility. And when my client gets on the stand, or one parent gets on the stand and then the other parent gets on the stand, that judge is judging their credibility. And sometimes it comes down to who they believe more. And maybe on that particular day, they felt like the parent that's the alienating parent came across better. And maybe they believe their story more. Because the alienating parent's always going to say what? They're going to say, I'm not doing that. That's what the child's saying. That's how the child doesn't want to go over there. It's not coming from me. We all know that's a lie. But if they say it with enough believability and they come across well on the stand, the judge could think they're the more credible party.
Is there anything that you can do in litigation against the alienating parent that kind of like forces them? And I don't know, some type of therapy to realize the actions that they're taking against that other parent and with the children?
You can ask for that. Many times judges at the end of the case, they want to hear from you, or either through the testimony from your client, everything you want to ask for. So I will many times have a checklist there, and I just go down it with my client so the judge knows exactly what we're asking for. And you can ask for therapy. You can say, the alienating parent needs counseling, or they need parenting courses that are designed for parental alienation to show them what they're doing. They may not, a lot of alienating parents understand what they're doing and they're doing it on purpose. But some don't get it. They don't understand that their comments and their eye rolls and things like that, the child's picking up on all that.
Right.
So I think you can ask for counseling or appropriate parenting courses that'll help them understand, look, you can't be doing that.
Well, it's one thing to advocate for 50-50, but on the other side, if you got one of these parents that are exhibiting some of these behaviors, obviously those are very dangerous. But I do believe that both is best in a child's life. And if there's one parent there that's not mentally capable and that would pull these tricks and use the children as a weapon, I'd like to see some type of legislation. And I don't know if there's any answers. I'm just saying hypothetically, because I'd love to see all kids have both parents. We know that's not possible, but I'd like to see some type of legislative solutions to get them some therapy, to get more awareness out with parental alienation, and bring these families back together.
Well, even though we've got these shared parenting laws and this 50-50, best interest of the child still rules the day. What is in the best interest? If the judge feels like that 50-50 is not in the best interest, they've got the right to do something different. And the behaviors you're talking about, if I were representing someone and we had those behaviors on the other side, I'm going to tell the judge that you can consider those under the rebuttable presumption part of the 50-50. And you can use that to say, there's a rebuttable presumption that 50-50 is going to work, but I think because of mom's behavior or dad's behavior, I don't think that's going to work, and I don't think I want to do that. So I want to order a different parenting time.
How often would you say that drugs are an issue in cases of alienation?
I'm not sure of the research on that. Many times when we have alienating parents, they have some kind of psychological issue. Sometimes we see a borderline personality disorder. Sometimes we see narcissism. Sometimes we see other diagnoses like that. But as far as drugs causing that kind of behavior, I don't know that I've really seen that. I've seen drugs involved with a parent that's obviously being an alienating parent, but I don't know that was actually causing it.
I'm just asking out of curiosity. There's some of these things that we've been asking some of the kids and the parents when we're out at these events. One interesting thing was back in Texas, we went through and asked all these different ladies if they came from an intact family or a divorce. Crazy thing. Don't know if it was luck of the draw, but the ones that went to private school actually came from an intact family versus the ones that went to a public school came from a divorced family.
Interesting.
So I'm constantly trying to find out these different scenarios to see if there's any correlations to this. We got a really good question down here, and this is something that I think happens a lot. Let you answer it, Kevin, from Randy Betts. He said, is breastfeeding an excuse to keep the child from a father and him not to have the kid overnight? We know it's used.
That is true, and I'm kind of laughing. I want to be very careful with this. You've always first got to believe that the mom has the child's best interest at heart. And I think the research is very clear that the longer, and I'm definitely not a physician, but my understanding is that the longer that a mom breastfeeds a child, the better. The breast milk helps coat their veins and helps with other organs and stuff. And it's just healthier for the child the longer you can breastfeed. Now, there's limits on that. And absolutely, I've had cases where the mom was using breastfeeding as an excuse to not allow visitation. And there are ways to work around that. And that's what you have to try to do. But absolutely, it can happen. And I will tell you, judges are very leery about jumping into that issue. I don't remember a time that a judge, for example, said, okay, at 14 months, you're stopping all breastfeeding. I think a judge is going to have a real issue doing that. Many probably would not feel like they could do that constitutionally. That's really a parent's decision. But I also think that if a judge feels like breastfeeding is starting to be used as a weapon to keep the other parent from having visitation, they will put some kind of parameters in place to make sure that that's not happening, that the other parent is getting their visitation time.
Well, the conversation of you can pump the milk comes up a lot too. I've actually, Randy, I've seen that one quite a bit. I know more about it than I'm probably going to talk about, but that, I guess it is a little bit of a controversial one because, I believe the breastfeeding is probably the best option for the child, but so is having their daddy.
Well, yeah, and the answer, Randy, is yes. It happens. It's definitely been used as an excuse.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I think it was a good night, man, and we had many questions coming in, guys. If they wanted to reach out to you, Kevin, to find where to get your services, where would that be?
You can reach us at kevinhickeylaw.com. And then on our phone number is 479-434-2414. Most of my practice is domestic relations, divorce, custody, guardianship. We do some grandparents' rights cases and adoptions, that kind of thing. And we're located in Arkansas, so that's where our primary office is. But we also take those high conflict custody cases all over the country. Usually ones involving parental alienation, false abuse allegations, that kind of thing. And what we do is we get admitted in your state for your particular case and then work with your local attorney on your case.
All right. I know you mentioned grandparents' rights. How often did those cases come up?
They come up a pretty fair amount and have gotten more and more popular the last few years. But as far as winning them, the burden's usually pretty high. There was a case, and if people are wanting to read more about it, there's a case out of, I think it was the state of Washington, called Troxel. It's Troxel.
Yep.
It's a Supreme Court case. And then there was a couple of cases that kind of refined it a little more in the years after. But that's a U.S. Supreme Court case, and it talked about grandparents' rights and parental rights, and kind of what it's narrowed down to is, and what the holding is that the parent of a child, the parents are the ones that get to decide the parenting of that child, and they get to decide who should be around and who shouldn't. And if they feel like it's in the best interest of the child for the grandparents not to be around, that's their call. And so most states now have grandparents' rights visitation statutes, but Troxels is out there kind of controlling that. So it's a real high burden to show that you can get grandparents' rights. They're hard to win.
Yeah, so we actually had a case where the father and the mother had 50-50. The mom died in an accident. So, but she had a live-in boyfriend that she had for 6 months. The grandparents were wanting custody, but they couldn't get access. So they used the boyfriend.
Yeah.
And this father had to spend $300,000 to win custody of his daughter from a boyfriend.
Well, that's really unfortunate. That really is. But I've had a handful of cases, unfortunately, in the last few years where the grandparents came to me, or I'm on the other side of it, and it's because their son or daughter died. And so now they've lost their connection to their grandchildren. And so they're wanting to file. So, yeah, unfortunately, many times when we get those cases, it's coming out of a tragedy like that.
Right. All right, guys, we'll reach out to Kevin if you need him. Kevin, again, I appreciate you so much for coming on, and I guess we'll do this again in 2 weeks.
Sounds good, man. Good seeing you.
All right, brother.
Thank you for joining another exciting episode of Dad Talk Today. We are so glad you are here. Guys, we are a listener-supported podcast, and without your help, it's hard for us to do this show. If you would, please go over to patreon.com/dadtalktoday, where you can make a monthly contribution towards helping us keep this show on the air. Maybe you don't want to join Patreon. We also have Cashapp, we have Venmo, PayPal, or you can mail us. Dad Talk Studios, LLC, P.O. Box 321, Waverly Hall, Georgia, 31831. Guys, again, we're so glad you're here, and I just want you to remember one thing. You have what it takes to make a difference in the world. Never stop, never give up, and stay cool. Stay Dad. See you next